has to be solid on the front lines. Even if you run a flashy offense and want to avoid the concept of pocket passing and run to the right, running to the left, and throwing, and so not needing the offensive line so much, you still got to have one, because guess what? Every now and then you got a 3rd and 3. The only way you're going to get that first down is with a good offensive line, no matter what you call. Football don't really change. Football stays remarkably similar. It runs in cycles. And right now, we had a cycle where, for whatever reason, the passing game has become almost unstoppable. A lot of that has been due to rule changes, targeting and causing a timid sort of play, but that's not as true in college as in the NFL, of course. But I think it's just the advent of the receiver. The wide receiver in today's time is an unexplored commodity. It's not talked about near enough. It's always about the quarterback and the quarterback and the quarterback. Let me tell you something, folks. They used to call those things, they used to call them batteries, connections, tandems, duos. They used to talk about passing attacks, the quarterback and the receiver. That's a duo, and that's how they got famous. That's how they got known, was quarterback and the receiver became a pair, hand and glove. And that doesn't change, because no quarterback's ever going to throw a pass and catch it himself unless his name, well, you get the point. You got to have a receiver to make a catch. And a good receiver can make or break a quarterback. So the reason for the offensive explosion in the last 2 or 3 years has a lot to do with the advent and the metamorphosis of today's modern monster receivers. Go take a look at the size, the demeanor, and the athleticism of the top receiving corps in college football, and you'll see that they're not anything like what you've seen in the past. And so I think the evolutional circle, it will become, the defense will learn to answer, and they'll have cornerbacks bigger than the receivers. And so we'll have a flow where that'll cut the passing game down back to where it should be as an alternative to playing football. And so is it wise for a program to load themselves up a certain way when it might be this very year that defense rears its head and suddenly nobody can score points? So the premium of having a defensive team, in my opinion, is always going to help somebody try to win a football game. Any jackass can score, but it's so hard to stop that jackass once he's got his mind made up. If he's got the receiver, the quarterback, and a good line, and some running backs, and he's got a little desire. Anybody that's got all that can score, but it ain't easy to score if you don't have half of it or a third of it. Tennessee got maybe a quarterback or two that could do a decent day's work. Got maybe a couple receivers that could be functional and some capacity on 7 or 8 teams in the conference, but they don't really have anything in regard to these premium receivers required to have the wide open offenses that Heupel's been trying to put together. Of course, you got to understand, he didn't have any of those monsters down there in Florida, but it's all about matching up. He certainly matched up against his opposition with the big receivers when needed. And Georgia this year is loaded with receiver like they've never in their history have ever had this many good wide receivers. And they've got 5 quarterbacks sitting there waiting for a chance to go, and one pretty good one that's going to get the chance most likely. So Georgia will go against nature and pass football quite a bit this year. In fact, running will be a counterweight or something to change the pace when you hand it to a running back. If they run it the way I think they will, it's going to be pretty much a wide open and we'll be throwing to somebody, whether it's a running back or a tight end, most of the time, if we're going to be successful. But that brings us to the next question: is Georgia going to run that kind of offense, or are they too stubborn to get with the wave of today's offenses? Now, I don't think that's the case. I think Kirby Smart gets portrayed as being stubborn on account of because he is. But, you know, there's something good to be said for stubbornness. When you win him with it, it's called grit. But my purpose of tonight's episode was to kind of talk about the whole division, because for the first time in a few years, Georgia didn't win the division, so they have to go back to the basics and figure out how to do that. And so looking at the Eastern Division for 2021, it looks like the University of Georgia is in prime position to walk away with this East Division. It should be that way. There shouldn't be any real challenges. And that's what we're trying to figure out as we go through the conference. But first, let's try to figure out who is healthy, who had any kind of long-term diseases like Tennessee-itis or Mark Richt syndrome, where nobody really had any of those. And so the conference of the division is reasonably healthy in that standpoint, allowing for, of course, Tennessee-itis having firmly set in there in Tennessee. But when you look at the Eastern Division with any kind of integrity, you'd have to say that there are no national title contenders in that Eastern Division of the SEC other than University of Georgia. Florida could not even make an effort to pretend to be in that class in the best season they have had and will have within the section of a 10-year span, that being right in the middle of a bad 10 years. They just have the best year they're going to have in the middle of that, if that makes any sense to you. So Florida's having some trouble just getting the team organized, and they're trying to talk their way through it. But that outfit is not a national title contender. Their program isn't even set up for that. They won in the East last year, and mainly because Georgia handed it to them. And that's going to always be the case with today's dynamic, that someone in this Eastern Division will only win it when Georgia just stumbles profusely. It's Georgia's division to lose, just like Clemson has the ACC, Alabama's got the SEC, at least half of it. Georgia can say that getting that East is something they position themselves to be the master of. It has not been an easy task, and it shouldn't be an easy task. You see, ordinarily there'd be Florida, Tennessee, and Georgia as the three big cats in that Eastern Division, no matter how many they bring in. Bring in a Missouri, bring in whatever you want. But nothing has ever been, no three have been real winners in that division except Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida. They have a history and tradition of winning. And they think of themselves as winning football teams, and they behave so most of the time. And when that doesn't happen, they usually respond with some action. So they are winners in that sense. But they also have idiosyncrasies that they've built into their culture. Florida's a passing culture, speed, quickness, passing, a finesse football team. Not necessarily tough, not necessarily gritty, but sometimes a little bit pernicious. You will give them credit for being a little bit stubborn and tough at times. Georgia's a running football team. They run the football, is what they do best, and when they can throw a little defense in there, they've done all right. Georgia's always had quarterbacks that could pass when needed, and some of the great plays in Georgia history have been passing. So to say Georgia ignores the pass is not correct. They do like to run the football because they are a ball control team that wants that clock to disappear with themselves ahead as soon as possible. As soon as that ball is kicked off, the goal is to get that clock back to zero with Georgia having more points. and that's how they view playing football. They're going to have to change their perspective.